And this, I know I'm going to have a hole for the head. Let me just look back and see how much of this is going to come off. So I need to be able to choke the engine, so I need to basically get a big hole up here. Now normally I wouldn't fly the plane with the cowling the first couple times because I'd want to bench run it, go in, tighten the engine bolts. But I want to have the cowling on just so the first flight is an indication of how this is going to fly. Now my own personal way of doing this is I want to cut a hole so I can get this to start to fit down, but then I can start to look down and see I need to take a little more, a little more, a little more, and I'll put the sanding drum on so I'll be able to get a nice, basically a hole. So another thing too, air has to go in there too, so you can't just have a hole for the glow plug. So now I've done a fit and I know I need to open that up just a little bit. In fact, more than a little bit. Then I'll go back and forth. And the best way is just put this back in place, mark where it's a little bit, needs a little more adjustment, back and forth. Gonna have to put a little slot in here for the needle valve. Nice little fiberglass cowl. So I can look at this. Now I try to line the screws up, just roughly. It's gonna come there. I need to have, I'm back the right amount. What I need is a pen with some ink. Let's see if the Sharpie marker should write a little better. I know I've gone back far enough. Now I tried to allow enough room for cooling, but because of the V deflector and the air outlets, there should be plenty of air going through there. It looks like it's a pretty nice, neat installation here. Now what I did, I just took this, just for safety's sake, left a little more clearance in the back. Or it's going to allow us to use different headers, longer headers. Got enough air going around here. Got all the tubing connected. Need to fit up a spinner. Now I did a couple of checks. It looks like the ground clearance is perfect for a 14-inch prop. And for smaller props, of course, it'll be even better. Want to make sure nothing is binding behind the spinner here. I left extra clearance because I want to be able to fit other motors in here. This is ultimately going to be a motor test ship. Now we've got a couple little odds and ends to do, and this is the point in time where I try not to rush because I don't want to forget to put the tip weight in. I've got to put some tip weight in this, and I would suggest if you're starting this, start with 2 ounces. You're probably going to wind up with 1.5 ounces, but 2 ounces. Every once in a while I just like to look back and see, because you can bet I'll forget to tighten something. It's always, as many times as I've gone out and try to put the push on to fly a new plane on the next day, Joe Adamusco and I have forgotten to tighten a glow plug. We've forgotten to tighten the prop, and among other things. But tip weight, before I forget, tip weight. Now one thing on my model, what was a tight fit, was the flap rubbing up on the side of the fuselage. And I want to have the clearance, so I took a piece of rough sandpaper. This was not binding, but just rubbing and making crazy noises here. I may have to take a little bit of that material away. Just work that sandpaper back and forth. Cut some of the covering material away eventually. Now I would say absolutely a minimum for the first flight minimum 2 ounces. That would be 8 squares, the little lead squares. Okay, now here's a really valuable little trick. When you're using this type of a tip weight box, make a bigger hole in the tip weights. Because in this case we need to stack 8 of them in there. And I want to be able to, in other words, these holes are not precision drilled, so when you stack 8, like 8 slices of bread, the holes don't all line up. If you make them just a little bit bigger, and again, for that first flight, just in case we have something that we have not anticipated, but one thing we don't want to have is a big giant lack of line tension until we get our flight trim. And we're going to do a little basic bench trimming here, but a really detailed bench trim, there's a bench trim video, so I don't want to just stretch that out. We're just going to do the basic. And there is, if you're at a point where you think that would help you, we have it. It's a dedicated tape for bench trimming a ship just like this before you fly it. But now what happens is there's still room between the tip weight and the box. And what'll happen is if you take some of these weights, well, if you left all 8 of them, these weights are going to start vibrating and they're going to chew a hole in the box, or else in the worst of all worlds, in the best of all worlds, they're just going to be that they vibrate all over the place. Now one way is when you finally get the amount that you need, take a little bit of a paper towel like this. Sometimes you can wet it, but you want to make what amounts to be just a cushion, so that as you press the tip weight box down, you feel a little bit of resistance. See, we just have a little bit of a spring action on it. And of course we're going to probably take some of that tip weight out, but we sure don't want to start on the light side. And as a safety thing, because I'm always very safety concerned, it probably would be a good idea once you establish how much tip weight you're going to want to use, put some Scotch tape over this, that just in case the screw loosened up, this won't come out, or the tip weight won't come out and possibly hurt somebody. Next thing, just shake that, and if you hear rattling, put some more Kleenex in there. Now that type of a tip weight box works well, but you always want to have a redundancy system. You want to have something that you're at the field and a bunch of young kids are there, a bunch of women, a bunch of other flyers, or doesn't matter. You don't want to have, that's a bullet. When that comes out at 60 miles an hour, and I have seen that in my time of doing modeling, I have seen that come out and go through wings of planes, hit people. It's not a funny thing. That tip weight box is a serious thing. Okay, we look like we got 2 ounces of weight in there. It's nice and solid. Now one of my golden rules is I never fly a model without the hinge lines taped. It just creates too many possibilities that I'm going to have a trim problem. So what I'm trying to do here, I want to deflect the flap. I'm going to do the flaps and the elevators. And by the way, that is the best way is to do everything. Don't fool around. Now this is one of the tapes that you can use, ordinary Scotch multitask tape. They do make hinge line tape. That's a tad better. I've never had any problem with this. You want to, while the flap is deflected the opposite way, lay on a piece. Now this is going to make the controls sound squeaky for about 10 flights. They're going to be ee, and it's going to make you crazy. But after that point in time, the additional performance that you get, especially when a model is heavy, especially when it's heavy, or especially if you have big gaps, and most ARFs do. So this is one of the steps I would not leave out. Tape the elevators. tape the flaps. Now, I remember when we did the original, the Brodak Cardinal Arf, I remember how much resistance there was. People said, oh, you don't have to tape the hinge lines. And every time I went to fly one and it didn't fly the way I was accustomed to seeing them fly, the first thing, oh, I didn't think you had to tape the hinge lines. So now I'm making sure that I emphasize it. A lot of people still don't realize it. And in cases where it doesn't add to the performance, like on a really light plane, when it doesn't add anything, it doesn't take anything away either. Just get used to hearing the controls be a little mushy for 6, 8, 10 flights. That's worth doing. If you get nothing else off of this whole tape, don't forget that step. Now when you have thick elevators, sometimes it's easier just to use a wider tape. This is just ordinary packaging tape. But the whole procedure is exactly the same. Paper towel or something to hold it down. In fact, we'll hold the other side down here. Make it a little bit easier. Make sure it's down all the way. Now, if you really don't like the sound of the controls being squeaky and stuff, there's a way you can get rid of it. And I would suggest if you're that type of person, you're very conscious of that. When we're all done, turn the plane over, take ordinary Pledge furniture wax and spray it into the hinge lines. And we'll sit there and work the controls for 5 minutes. The Pledge will work its way down into the hinge lines. And what you'll wind up is, see, the tape is sticking in there for a certain amount of time, but it's not going to stick there forever. Especially in hot weather, it seems to go away a lot quicker. But now we have sealed control surfaces. Now, a little personal safety thing that I always do, all my airplanes have one thing in common. They all have a forward up line, as does this one. And I always take a little piece of red wire, red tape, red anything to mark which is up, so that when I connect the control lines, I don't connect them backwards. I've seen people do that, and I figured, well, I'd probably benefit by learning from their experience. And this is just so, and because we anticipate a lot of other people getting to fly this. Now, we have a Rojet 90 test ship that I'll bet 100 different people have flown already. And I know, we use it like a taxi cab. We use it every day. People come to the field, they just run out to the handle. So what happens is I want all of this stuff as bulletproof as possible and idiot-proof. And this helps make it idiot-proof. So I always know my line that connects would have the similar piece of little red wire or tape. A nice little safety. Very good safety idea. Now, on the adjustable lead out, I noticed that when mine came from the factory, the bolts were hand tight, but I would want to start with the lead outs back. That tends to make the plane more stable. As you want more and more turn, you can move them forward, but for right now I moved them almost all the way back and tightened them up. Now if you over tighten them, they're delicate, so you don't want to over tighten it like you're putting a wheel on a Mack truck, but you want them to be tight. I also take some wheel bearing grease and grease the lead outs. Any braided lead out tends to wear, and you, from time to time, should put a little bit of oil or grease. A lot of times what I do at the end of a flight, I'll find a place on a plane where there's castor oil, rub my finger in it, just come over and do that to the lead outs at the end of every flight. But again, when you're looking for thousands and thousands of flights instead of a weekend flyer, you need to do that kind of thing. Now here's something that I think is another one of the little critical things you really have to be aware of. What happens is, and I was adjusting the lead outs back and forth through their whole range, and if I move the front lead out further back than this, now normally you wouldn't. The front lead out wouldn't go back here. This would be the normal range, I think. But I don't have any binding in the controls at all. When I move the front lead out back past the midpoint, And I'm going to put a little scratch on here. It's about where you really wouldn't move them anyway, but be aware as you look inside, and I know you can't see it with the camera, but it rubs on one of the gear blocks, which I think would be a problem. In other words, the problem would be if you decide you want to have these lead outs all the way back, you may have to get in there and somehow grind away some of that gear block. But most people are not. Most people, but what I'm going to do is put a little mark here where I know that's as far back as that can go. But another tip-off is if you move into controls and you'll hear squeak, squeak like a violin, it's because you've turned a lead-out wire into a violin string. So this is not something I think most people would be concerned with, but if you hear a squeaking sound when you're working the controls, move that front lead-out forward, you'll probably eliminate the whole problem. Now what I did, I squirted some pledge down in the hinge lines just to see how nice these controls would be. And these controls have really loosened right up. There's almost no noise at all. And I'm going to try to free them up a little bit more before we actually get out to the field. Because with anything new like this, you need to work on it. And just as an example, just work the controls, let that pledge work its way in. You probably could use other things like WD-40. But if you hear anything like a violin sound, you know that front lead out is rubbing on the gear block. Now we get to the kind of more fun things, the cosmetic part of this. Now, one of the things I learned when I did the Brodak Cardinal ARF, I was uncomfortable with the decal, and I realized I was treating it like a decal, soaking it in water. That was the problem. So again, reading the directions is always the answer. But these decals, if you try to apply them in a different way than what's shown in the directions, you run the risk that it's going to be a problem. Now, it's not a problem if you do exactly what they say. You mix up a little dish of soapy water, and I'm going to demonstrate this because this is one of the things I had a little problem. I always leave a little bit of an edge around these decals too. I'm not sure the right word for these is really decals. Probably it's press-ons or rub-ons or I don't know, spare tires or something. But anyway, I leave myself a little bit of the clear around the edge. I don't want to trim right on a black line. It just gets too cute. And when you get to this point, and boy, it's the end of a very long day. This has turned out to be 5 hours has become Hello Santa Claus. But I don't care, because the objective was to get this done in one day. I really wanted to see if that was a practical thing to do, and it definitely is. And if you were not making a lot of these little changes and shooting video and everything, you could probably chop that down significantly. Now, I need to go get some water. You get some water with some couple of drops of laundry detergent or dish water in it. Know about where you want to place it. Let me get the water. So what you do, it's not a decal. You don't soak that in water. You just get this wet with a little bit of that, just a couple of drops of dish detergent, get it good and wet. I want to take, and I peel the decal back. Why am I calling it a decal stuff? Let's see if I can do this. Make it look like it's easy. It is easy. See, that's why you leave enough of the clear around it. And of course, if you're going to fly the plane in competition, you would want to have your AMA numbers on the other side. Now you can just squeegee out the water, and as you squeegee it out, it tends to stick down. Now as we come up on the cosmetic part, I have to make a decision here because we've been working on this all day. One of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to get a little bit of touch-up paint and touch up where I've scratched the monocoat off. Just doll it up a little bit. And tomorrow morning I want to shoot some photos of it before I actually get down the flying field. I'm hoping some of the guys will be down there, give me a hand. We kept a bench run it, but excited about it. Anytime you've added a new aircraft to your Air Force, it really doesn't matter if it's the most elaborate exotic or an ARF or an ARC. And believe me, I could think of a project that would really be done if we were doing an ARC and totally sand it out and put a whole, like Mike Costello has done that, do a total finish job on it. Now I just got to get some dry paper towels. You could make like a cheater ARC. That'd be cool. Now from this point on, there's really what I call pre-flight stuff, not bench trimming. We've got a whole DVD on bench trimming and locating the CG and things like that, but we sure want to do, before I go to bed tonight, I want to put a good pre-flight on this. Go around, tighten things up, work the controls in a little bit more, make sure things like the proper tight, the lead out guide is tight, that we haven't had any issues. Now the last little bit of fun, I zeroed out my scale, and I'm not sure this scale is real accurate, but it's always been a reference point for me anyway. Now keep in mind the ship has a little more than normal tip weight, just a little more than we'd expect, probably a ½ ounce. We could deduct a ½ ounce from this. Let me make sure we're balanced.